The Daniel Cleland Podcast.
We are live. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Daniel Cleland Podcast. Today I have two amazing people to speak with. Of course, to my left here, you see Miss Melissa Stangl, my co-founder and extraordinary leader of Soltara Healing Center. And on the screen in front, we have a Mr. Jesse Gould, the founder of Heroic Hearts Project, an organization serving military veterans from around the world to heal their PTSD by working with plant medicines and ayahuasca. We've worked with Jesse for the past few years. I want to kind of go back and have Jesse tell the story of how we got to know each other and Jesse's journey, which is pretty long and winding and interesting. But yeah, Jesse's been busting ass like a champ for the past, 6-7 years or something like that. 5, 6, 7 years. I'm not sure. You can elaborate on that. But Jesse's been killing it. And it's really inspiring to see a guy who is putting his heart and soul into a project, which, you know, I didn't know it paid so well, as you can see by Jesse's background with this, $10 million library he's got behind him with a psychedelic, obviously handmade ceiling. Apparently he's doing pretty well. So maybe Jesse, do you want to let us know what's going on in your world? How you doing, man? What's cracking? How's been 2020 for you?
You weren't supposed to say that last part. We're supposed to keep that part on the low key. This is obviously not my library. It's been good.
Michelangelo doesn't support heroic hearts.
He should. It's good to see you both, Melissa. It's been too long. Dan, always a pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having me, and always good to talk to you. I guess I can go into my background and what brought us all here in this sort of crazy journey. So I was a military veteran in the U.S., Army Ranger, which included 3 deployments to Afghanistan. And when I got out, I had similar issues as a lot of veterans, where I just had a very hard time adapting to civilian life. On the surface, I actually did pretty well, where I had a great job and great social network. But under the surface, there was just a lot of anxiety, depression, just overconsumption of alcohol, all sorts of just unhealthy habits and decisions. And I didn't know what to do. And I quickly realized that the mental health options were very limited in the US, and most of them involved a lot of medication. So on my own journey, that somehow led me to ayahuasca, not coming from psychedelics, but as many probably hear right now, just somehow ayahuasca finds you just as much as you find it. And that sort of just set in motion a series of events that I find hard to describe and explain away, because after that, from my own healing, hearing all these stories, it was just the immediate inspiration that there are so many veterans in my immediate community and broader that are struggling. The suicide rate among veteran community is all-time high. In the past 15 plus years, I've done nothing to curtail it, the government, the VAs. And so that's what inspired me to start Heroic Hearts Project, to provide this information, provide this healing to the veteran community. And when I was starting it out, through sort of a random connection, I was in Colombia, in Medellin. So I started the first website in an internet cafe that only had, electricity half the day. I randomly met at a bar a guy from Canada who was associated with ayahuasca, but he was also associated to the retreat center that Melissa was working at. And so then somehow we connected. And at the same time, an Argentinian crew were filming a documentary about American veterans going to ayahuasca, which is its own crazy story. And so here, a few months after my own ayahuasca trip, it was just a whole nother situation. And that's how Melissa and I first came across each other's paths.
Cool. So, what year was that you started your this website? When did you find yourself in this cafe in Colombia? How long ago was that? When did you have your first ayahuasca ceremony?
Yeah, so it's 2017, actually pretty relatively recently. But just with the growth of ayahuasca from a Western perspective and the psychedelic movement and just everything that's gone on, it does seem like 10 years ago.
So you got involved with ayahuasca in 2017. Is that when you came to Pulse Tours
Yeah.
about? So it was like, it must have just been when I was kind of exiting.
Yeah, it was like August
Yep.
2017, I believe. So we were kind of in a transition out at that point. But actually, I believe it was Jesse's retreat was the last kind of period for me being on site. I really wanted to stay for that retreat and just make sure you guys were taken care of and kind of go through that whole journey together. So yeah, we're still waiting on the documentary for that, I believe, but it did feel like sort of this inflection point from which Heroic Hearts really took a giant leap forward, and we connected with these veterans, that I believe you're still working with some of them as part of Heroic Hearts now. So that definitely felt like a little, inflection point for our journeys together, at least.
Yeah, definitely. Because it was after mine. I was fortunate enough to find a funder, and the first group of veterans I sent was actually to Pulse, and I think Dan, you might have been able to meet a few of them. There's a five of them, and so they all had amazing experiences. And so then later in that year, that's when the whole sort of documentary came about, and
That's
so
right.
then I was like, of course I have to be there. This is exactly what I just started. And so, yeah, and Melissa and I got along right away. She very much impressed myself and everybody else of just how diligent and on point she was. And fortunately from there, our paths have just intertwined, and it's been cool to see this group sort of progress through this together, and all the highs and lows. Obviously some of the lows nowadays, but there's been a lot of great healing and reaching so many different groups.
And it wasn't long after that then we opened Soltara, and then you came with your dad, right? It was almost like right when we opened. So you kind of were like in support of this new project that we started too, and then you had sent some veterans through later. So yeah, definitely appreciate how our kind of paths have grown together over the years.
Yeah, we sent one vet to the very first one, that the big opening event that you had.
That's right.
And then I wanted to go at the early stages too. So I it's been a while for me and my family. My dad agreed to go, and my girlfriend at the time, and that was actually her first time meeting my dad too. So it was a pretty interesting. But they got along right away, so it all worked out.
So you basically started this journey by yourself on a calling based on your own experience in 2017. You got linked up serendipitously with some people who connected you to Pulse Tours. Pulse Tours, you met Mel. Maybe we crossed paths. I certainly heard about you and Heroic Hearts as I was kind of exiting Pulse Tours, and then you came into the fold at Soltara as well, and basically continued the personal relationships that you had with us, except we moved on to a new project. When did you kind of get that like idea that like this is going to be my new full-time venture? Like this is my new calling. Like what were you doing before in terms of work and everything? And then was there a kind of a delineation between like, here's my life before Heroic Hearts and here's my life after?
No, I mean it's probably more of like an avalanche. I don't think there's ever a moment where you realize that you're in the avalanche. It's just you're just trying to survive during it. Before all of this, I was in Tampa. I was in corporate finance, and it was actually, like I said, it was a decent job. On the surface, all the aspects of my life were actually like check the box, you're doing well. But it just kind of came to this point where I was just so miserable on a daily basis, and I knew something needed to change. And one of the more obvious ones was the job, just because I quickly realized that the corporate world wasn't for me. Especially coming from like ranger lifestyle to slow down. Like
Civilian life?
yeah, and I liked actually finance, but it's just the corporate side of things where you are actively working to automize your job. And so you're just constantly in this like continuous loop. And so when I finally committed to ayahuasca, which took some like, convincing between the two parts of my brain of, why are you doing this? You should do this kind of thing. I decided to leave my job. I gave them the notice. Fortunately, by that time I had some like savings. I was financially able to go, and I essentially just bought the one-way ticket with the plan of, I don't know what's going on with me. I don't know what's going to happen in the Amazon, but I do know I just need to reflect. I need to get out of whatever self-destructive bubble I was in. And fortunately, like for me, travel is rejuvenating. And so my kind of plan was just to go over there, see what it's about, maybe take some time off, or sort of figure out, reassess. But then ayahuasca obviously came into the picture, and then that completely changed the dynamic of my brain. Like it was the relief on a lot of things, it was different perspectives on a lot of things. And so it wasn't necessarily just an epiphany that I should start this. It was kind of more of a growing almost obligation of, while I was over there and it did seem to be having lasting continual benefits. I just, every once in a while you hear of a friend or somebody you served with that unfortunately took their own life, or you talk to a friend and they're severely struggling with their family, alcohol, what have you. It's just a constant sort of world that you live in. And so after coming from this, it was just like, hey, I have to at least not push people, but at least show them that there might be a light at the end of the tunnel if they're interested in this. And just going with that and doing research, it was just kind of like a little by little. But then, it sort of took a hold of me. Like I said, just all these weird interactions of who you meet in random spots, and it just going, and at some spots it slowed down. And I think the sort of calling, or the need to do it, really happened after sending that first group, and continues to be restored every time I see another veteran group. Because like in between those times, then it's just a very uh, it's a very hard sort of dynamic. Especially, we all know in the psychedelic world, you're walking uphill with all the obstacles in front of you. And so, like when you're not doing retreats, it's a lot of outreach. It's a lot of keeping track of business. It's a lot of like the back paperwork, which is very tedious, and you're just like, oh, why am I doing this? But then, like the New York Times piece when we were all filming there, something like that, going there and just seeing these amazing transformations, you're like, all right, let's keep going. We got to keep doing this. And that's where it's almost like this. You have to resubscribe, and that's what keeps you doing it, because you have to, because there's not really other organizations, or there's not really other support. And so that's what kind of keeps it going on a daily, monthly basis.
Yeah, man, I can 100% identify with that, because I actually had origins very similar to what yours were. I had a super powerful personal ceremony which really rooted me in the medicine, and really kind of like just opened me up to like, wow, this is absolutely incredible. And I just know so many people who could benefit from this and who just need to know about this. So I kind of like started this, like, I don't know where this is going, but I need to talk about it. I need to publicize it. I'm just so enthralled with this medicine and this experience. And so I kind of went through a couple of years where it was like, just getting a group every 6 months or something like that. And, and then after that, kind of going back to the world and just, getting back involved in the routine and everything. And I'd almost like forget about it. Like I'd almost forget how powerful it was until I took another group. And then I'd be like, oh yeah, and it would just solidify that. It would almost like recharge me to go just do another one. Like I do one and then fuck, I got to do another one.
Yeah.
Just because, the transformations are so powerful, the kind of emotional discharge that people are able to experience, in these ceremonies, and the way they feel after is like, there's nothing like it. And when you play the part of helping facilitate that for people, and they come up to you and they kind of thank you for that. I mean, I'm sure you get lots of people, lots of expressions of gratitude by the guys that you help and send down to these different places. and by other people in the community who respect what you're doing, that means so much. And then it motivates you to keep going and go through the paperwork and the kind of the nuts and bolts, the tedious work that goes along with it. And now fortunately, we're able to do this on a full-time basis. So like we get this recharge every single week. And I was actually just talking to one of our facilitators yesterday about this, Jocelyn. And like, that's what keeps her going, is that recharge every single week, where like, you just see the people come in and they're a mess and then they leave and they're all best friends. And they're like, my whole life has changed, every single week. It's pretty crazy. Melissa had kind of a similar experience to you of not really knowing how it was going to play out, but she's like, I just need to exit corporate America, right?
Yeah, I mean, I picture the way you're talking about it. It sounds like it was similar to me in that it was a tangential point in my life. Like my life was going one way, and I was like, I need a change. I need to do something different. I don't know what, but I need to change my environment, and maybe just see what happens from there. And I kind of joke sometimes that it's like the plants just recruited me, and we're like, you're actually going this way now, like for as far as you can go. And you just really do whatever you can to try and make it work. And I actually remember in the early days, you were like running across deserts to raise money and like climbing mountains. And I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that, but that was like one of the first things I remember was like, wow, this dude's like pushing himself to like raise money.
Well, I never got unfortunately that's still pending. I never got to do the full trip. I just did the desert run. So originally, and still to this day, it's supposed to be a desert run and then a raft trip down the Amazon and then climb one of the highest peaks in South America. But I quickly came to realize that was going to be like at least a $30,000 venture, and I had barely even like raised like a couple thousand for the nonprofit. So I didn't want the funds going there, and I was just like, oh, I can't afford this. But it was kind of my motivation of like, I have no idea. I had some business experience, but I had no idea how to run a nonprofit. I'm not necessarily like a salesman, so I'm not like great at just being like, hey, give me money. I have no idea how, still to this day, how to progress. Like if I was at one of those gala events, I would probably come away with less money than I entered with that, just because I don't know how to progress it. And so my idea was like, I do know how to get attention, and this kind of relates to what I'm doing. So like, let's just throw it all out there and see what brings attention. You never know. And so after the documentary, I did go to the Chilean desert, and it was like with a group, and there's a 250-kilometer sort of ultra marathon across the Atacama. And so that was like a pretty amazing experience, because you're like running through, it's a beautiful place, and there's a lot of desert and like salt flats, but then there's like canyons and water and stuff like that. And it was a pretty amazing experience.
I've got a couple of questions. First, quick question. So you are basically, this is your full-time job now.
I mean, essentially I have to do like freelance stuff on the side, because to this day, we've been able to keep it all volunteer. So, I mean, effectively with like time commitment is full-time plus, but in terms of, I have to do like other sort of engagements to pay the bills and make sure I stay eating and afford this wonderful library as well.
Okay, but you're fully engaged in this. So, what has that opened up in you to take on a passion project like this, that obviously you're not doing for the money, you're doing for the effect that has in the world. You're doing it to serve other people. It's obviously a big challenge, and as you've expressed, it's not like you came out with an MBA in nonprofit, enterprise and sales to like go and raise the money and run this. So it's obviously a passion project. What emotion, what feeling, what kind of sense of purpose has that opened up in you as, an entrepreneur? You're an entrepreneur. This is an entrepreneurial adventure. This is an entrepreneurial enterprise for you. And as the leader of an entrepreneurial enterprise, it's a very challenging and in diverse ways kind of project. And so just, for the folks out there thinking about doing something that they, might be afraid to do or might, not know the way yet? Like what did that open up in you, and how has your journey been from the entrepreneurial side of all this?
Yeah, I mean, emotionally, it opened up the whole spectrum of emotions and to the extremes, and I'm sure we can all like empathize with that. Where from despair to questioning what you're doing and why continue on, to elation and full fulfillment and and purpose and inspiration, and it's the whole thing. And it's just the question of like hanging on for the ride while you're doing it. But that is the human experience. That is what I was searching for. When you're in the corporate world, it tends to be the exact opposite, where you're not being challenged. It's the corporations tend to, you know, work out creativity in any equation, because creativity is variability, and and it's not efficiency in a lot of senses. And so, especially a lot of high energy or capacity people, which correlates well with a lot of veterans and like special ops. That's one of the reasons why they have such struggles when they get out, because they have this capacity, they have this energy, and sometimes it goes to the extreme where you're like just completely consumed by work. But there is that need. It's almost like that kid that they used to say has ADD, or they still do. It's like, no, it's not that he has a problem paying attention. He just has this energy and needs to do something else. So I mean, it's been all of it, but through the path, just meeting amazing people, present company included, that in themselves inspire you, and especially in the nonprofit, you get some people that you wish you might have not have met, but you also get some amazing people that are also willing to donate their time and their expertise just for the pure sake of helping somebody else. And so that's been a really rewarding part of the journey. And as we mentioned, the people that you hopefully end up helping, and looking back and seeing that hopefully you're leaving your past better than uh better than it was. Like, you are making an impact, and you are making that change in your little spot in the world. You are improving that as much as you can. They always say you kind of have to take care of yourself, and then you can take care of your close circle, and then maybe you can take care of the community. Some people try to reach and just try to change the world, but as long as you can start helping the people that you can, that are within reach, as long as you're also good, then that's a beautiful thing. And I think that is maybe not for everybody, but that is sort of the essence of being human and the essence of living. And I think that's what psychedelics teach us too, is that we come from a Western society that tends to suppress the expression of emotions, and especially in men. um, and it's always viewed as sort of the more animalistic, dumber side of us. But what I think psychedelics often reveal is it's actually the smarter side. It's the language of sort of the supercomputer in your brain that is intuition, that is guiding you. And so, experiencing these emotions, expressing these emotions, putting yourself in situations where they are challenged and that they will be seen by others. I think that is, for many of us, what the human experience is about.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And geez, I really wish more people could experience that and should experience that, I think. And, part of this kind of mission that we're on here personally, I think every single one of us here has uh, their own reason for being involved in the medicine. Like, like Melissa might have her reasons, to bring forward the traditions of the Amazon. There might be other people in the company that have their reasons to specifically like heal traumas, or, other people who believe in dietas. My personal like why for this is like exactly who you are right now, right? It's like you hit this medicine when you were feeling like shit. It opened you up and it inspired you to go out and put yourself in the world and go through all the despair and open yourself up to all those emotions, to help yourself and help other people through that and change the world in the process. And you know what? You're only 3 years in. I mean, it takes a while to get these things going, but congrats, because you just had a New York Times article that Tim Ferriss shared on his platform, right? So, I mean, I started basically in 2011, just very much like you did, with just kind of a few trips here and there. It wasn't until kind of 2014 and 2015, 4 years in, when it really started to take root and actually started to feel like a real company. And, here we are almost 10 years in, when it's feeling like a real dialed in kind of organization, right? One thing I've discovered through this whole journey is that it does take time. So, you go through all that stuff, but that's almost a training ground. And then you have these wins along the way, these inflection points that, like, you put the work in for long enough, you suffer for long enough, and then you'll get one of those wins. You'll get that New York Times article. And then all of a sudden Tim Ferriss is sharing about you. Then all of a sudden you get $100,000 grant.
Yeah.
Right?
And you never know the ripple effects that these little actions can have that transform into big actions. And who know the grant, right? So the grant now will help, X amount, 30, 40, 50 veterans to be able to have this experience. And that was because of, the New York Times article and the way that then they're going to go forth and change their communities and themselves and the world. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about this medicine world and this healing work is, the exponential ripple effects that it has on the world. It's you can take it really, really far, and turns out the impact can be a lot bigger than we could even imagine, honestly.
Well, let's just comment on that just for a sec, that ripple effect. Okay. So go back to 2013, right? Melissa came on a trip with me, and I was kind of just getting started out. Melissa came on a trip with me. That set in motion a series of events in her life. And then Melissa got in touch with you. And then that set in motion a series of events in your life. And then now you're doing this. And how many people have come into your orbit who have now set in motion a series of events in their life? And then how many of those people are going to be helping other people that set in motion series of events in those other people's lives?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that also brings to point of you have to have faith in yourself, and you have to have faith in what you're doing. Because I've had so many experiences where the sure thing falls through, but then the help or the saving grace comes out of nowhere. Like it's just like a random email that somebody reaches out to you. And it was the same thing with the things that brought that New York Times article. And what people don't realize when they see that kind of stuff is that was probably nearly like 2 years in the making from start to finish, where the person who wrote it, Ernesto Ladonho, who's the bureau chief in Brazil, great guy. He reached out to me, just kind of a really casual email. I wasn't sure, because you never know. Like when somebody says like, "Oh, I'm part of this," you're like, "Yeah, sure, okay." But so I reached out, and so then that started the relationship, and then we kind of had to figure out where each other were, like what we wanted from this, were we legitimate, all that kind of stuff. Especially with publicity around ayahuasca, you have to be kind of careful of where they're taking it. And so then that built the relationship. And then from there, it was like, okay, well, what kind of story does it want to write? And then our ability to fund and organize the retreat, and then talking with you and finding the right sort of time to do it, and finding the exact right people, which you can never do that, but it turned out to be the exact right people. And then him writing it, and then there's this back and forth with the New York Times, and then COVID delayed it, and so it was just this constant sort of thing. And so the process started a year and a half before it finally came out. And but those are sort of the things you have to have faith in it, because there's potential it couldn't have come out at that time. It might have still been a very small probability, but sometimes you have to kind of play those lottery tickets. You have to, what I've learned too, like along with patience, is like you have to do the fundamentals of business. Like you have to do the day in, day out. You can't just like count on long chances for everything, but you still have to like put it out there. You still have to contact people. You still have to give people the time of the day. You still have to have faith that something might work out. And as you mentioned, because of all those investments, especially the past 3-4 months, have been absolutely extraordinary for us. We had that article, we had the grant, we had all sorts of other connections that all hit at the same time. And so it hit me like like a tidal wave, but it's all good progress, but you never know. And I've had other seasons where I had 5 sure things and nothing came from it, and that's pretty depressing as well.
Well, dude, I mean, I think, 2020 has shown to all of us that even the safe option, even the sure thing, it's not safe and it's not sure. I mean, it doesn't matter what you're doing, it can fall through. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter what you're doing, you can get sick and you can die earlier than you planned on, out of nowhere. You never know what's going to happen in the world. And I think, a lot of people suffered this year because they had taken the safe option, and then all of a sudden now that business goes out of business and they need to get another job, but it's like there's just, I think it's shown us that not like this, the what appears to be the safe option or what comes across as a safe option is almost an illusion. And so that, why not take the risk, and why not start the journey that gives you passion and gives you, that thrill of like, you know what, I'm going to go on an adventure. My life is going to be an adventure. I'm going to venture out into the unknown. I'm going to follow my passions. I'm going to put myself to the test. I'm going to, have to go find the hidden gem in the cavern and, the volcano somewhere, like, the kind of the proverbial kind of fantasy adventure that entrepreneurship is really. But as you mentioned, entrepreneurship, man, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and it's not a wild swing at, at the ball. It's like, you've got to every single day get up, pay your dues, put your time in, have faith that it's going to work out, and just run the business fundamentals. Make sure that your books are in good order, make sure you're doing the right thing, make sure you're staying aware of the situation around you and making the good connections. You know what? Sometimes people don't want to talk to you. Sometimes the people you reach out to don't want to talk to you. They're busy. They think you're small time or whatever, especially when you're getting started. And that's fine. Don't get mad. Don't get discouraged. Just keep putting the work in. Keep trying. Keep reaching out. Keep trying to get creative.
I think that extra little spice too creates this extra energy within you. It's one thing to have this sort of safe life, and then when things go wrong with that safe life, you were never feeling inspired to begin with. You never maybe didn't have that passion, that drive anyway. And so then when it falls apart, then it can be extra devastating. But, when you are able to cultivate that passion for the work in the face of failure, it's still an adventure, right? And so I just remember for me, like when I was working in corporate America, it was very much like I would wake up with a sense of dread every day for work. And that is the worst feeling that I've ever experienced when it comes to like how I'm living my life is dread, And I remember right after I ended up working for Pulse, I had a dream that I was still back in my old job, and that sense of dread came back really, really strongly. And then I woke up from that dream and realized I was in the Amazon jungle at an ayahuasca center, and this was my life now. And just overwhelming sense. I'll never forget that feeling of just this overwhelming sense of like, yes, this is pushing me to the limits. Yes, this is hard. And, starting Soltara, I've never been pushed to the limits more in my entire life. But everything, like every day, it keeps me going through that daily business grind is because I love this work and I would not want to be doing anything else. Even if it fails, I'll know that I have done something that I enjoyed and it gets you through.
And even if it does fail, then the amount of courage and experience and like the tests you've put yourself through and the limits you've pushed yourself to and the expansion of your comfort zone and your realm of capacity, that is priceless experience. I mean, so now you're not just pigeonholed in one job. It's like now you can go out, like even if this fails, you're so much more equipped to go and do something relevant and important and be successful in the world because, this kind of experience, you just can't get it from like a typical kind of pigeonholed job in a corporation somewhere in United States where everything's automated and you're basically just kind of a cog in the machine. But
Well, and travel is another thing. I mean, Jesse, you mentioned that, that was something that really resourced you and fulfilled you. And, if I had sort of stayed in my lane, I would have never even thought like I could go international and work from another country or work in another country. And, that expansion of horizons too, I think is really, really valuable to have that sort of worldly experience, because then all of a sudden it's like the potential is incredibly high for places that you can go that will resource you and will inspire you, and you'll find a community that you can serve there, essentially.
I think one of the beautiful things about, especially related to what we're doing about like a lot of the Amazonian cultures, is just their relationship to nature, life and death. And I think in some of the same senses, success and failure, because a lot of these tribes, they live deep in the Amazon and they just see the cycle of life constantly.
life is real in the Amazon, man.
Yeah,
It's
but
it's visceral.
and life is connected to death. There is no disconnecting
Mhm.
it. It's not just one ends. It's a tree falls or this, and then there's 10,000 things that grow out of it and all these bugs that are eating it. And it's, you can really see sort of the cycle there. And so it's the same with success and failure. These are not like static points. From failure is
Mm.
more of a lesson, and from that success can bloom unless you just stop there, And so it's just this, how do you take it? How do you recycle what you have? And I think that is the entrepreneurial spirit. And for people who are trying, determination and keep going is always the key. And you have to reassess and all that kind of stuff. But you know, from that's what I'm fortunate that I was born with, or learned along the way, is just sometimes you just got to put your head down and keep going despite the headwinds. And if you just keep going, even in failure, even when you feel like it's kind of hopeless, that's what, when you look back when you're older, you're not going to regret that anytime.
Absolutely, man. And as has been proven by, many an entrepreneurial venture, including ours and including yours, if you put your head down and you just keep going and you keep going and you keep going and you suffer through this and you suffer through that, you just keep going. Eventually the world sees that. Eventually the right people see that and they say, that organization has character. That organization has intelligence. That organization has endurance and they're relevant and we can rely on them. We can bet on that person. We can bet on that guy. We can bet on that lady. We can bet on that organization. And when you generate, that's a way to generate respect, right? Respect is very important in this work and in this world. And interpersonal relationships based on respect are very valuable. So, when people test you, especially really kind of successful, high demand people, they get all kinds of requests and all kinds of pitches and everything like that. And a lot of people are fly by night. A lot of people are kind of flash in the pan. They get this big idea, they get a big inflated ego for a while, and then they try to do something, and then it doesn't work out, and they flounder and fail and they fizzle out. But it's the people who stick it out for year after year after year after year after year. You get more experience, you get better at what you do, and then you just become solid and you're stoic and solid and you're there. And then when people take notice, they take notice and they say, let's learn 5 minutes about this person or this organization's history. And they say, damn, all right, that sounds pretty acceptable. So yeah, I mean, I'm willing to take a bet on this. I'm willing to, share this. I'm willing to put my name behind this. I'm willing to put my resources behind this. So it really is, it really is one of those games that the risk benefit, or let's call it, the potential upside. The potential upside is really high, but you have to go through this like period of kind of self-doubt and you're questioning everything and you're not making any resources and you're like, you just kind of, you don't know what you're doing and you're being pushed to the limits and you're failing and people are rejecting you and everything like that. But if you can just hold that line for enough time, people will recognize you and people will. And then once it's like, as you just said, you're kind of experiencing an avalanche of attention right now and, people giving you donation, like big donations and grants and everything like that, it's like eventually you reach a tipping point, an inflection point where it's like now the world accepts you for what you've been trying to create. And then boom, then it just snowballs. And then it's just about maintaining your integrity when that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and to that too, it's again the ripples. I remember kind of in the story when Melissa and I were first working together for the documentary. Like I was immediately impressed just by how because I've worked with a lot of people in the same sort of capacity, especially logistics, organization, and reaching out to people and making sure they have all that kind of stuff. And it's a very tedious, not fun job. But I was just impressed by her of like how on point she was, how quick she was, and she really put that documentary like together on that side that might not necessarily be seen by people who watch it. And it's one of those things of like the ripple side of it is, if I was in the position and I saw her doing that and somebody asked me for a recommendation of who to hire, I'd be like, oh yeah, definitely her. It's you never know like how who sees your work and who's impressed by it.
On the topic of documentaries too, as Melissa can attest to, throughout our journey, like at Paul's Tours, we did how many documentaries? We had other people come in to do documentaries.
Several, yeah.
And none of them really hit hard, right? We kind of had high hopes, but none of them really hit hard. And like every one we did was like, this is going to be the one. This is going to be the one. Years later, and none of them really landed hard, or they took a kind of sensational, not flattering angle.
Yeah, really. There was a
on our
Wall
work.
Street Journal guy that came through and he ended up basically writing this terrible article about ayahuasca.
Right.
Like, how do you even like navigate media when it comes to like this work? Because there's a lot of variables
Yeah.
involved, so that integrity is really important too, really getting to know. I loved, Carlos and the whole team that came to work for that documentary. And obviously like you guys being involved was just it gave it a lot of heart, and I feel like we've been cut a few breaks in the recent
that's
project.
it.
Yeah.
We kind of stuck it out, and then you can't get frustrated and flustered and quit. You just keep going, and then eventually, Dennis brings Brian Rose down, and then all of a sudden there's Reconnect the movie. Then you guys come down with the New York Times, and all of a sudden there's a flattering New York Times article in an in-depth article.
Yeah, but
so
as flattering as you, that was one of the points because he wanted it to be even a little bit more. But they're trying to obviously from the journalistic perspective, they want to be like, hey, we can't come out as like pro this, so we need to have. But yeah, I mean, I agree. It was a great as good of a picture I think as you can paint of what all the work that we were all doing.
On that topic of determination and kind of just continuing to go, I imagine, and I'm kind of curious, your time in the military, how did that, I mean, obviously that is very much about determination and endurance, and just curious how that maybe shaped, how you kind of approach life or what lessons came from that time in your life beyond the medicine experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's like everything else in life. It's hard to know what's parts you come with and what parts are you learn and what parts are developed, and it's probably all three. Like there's probably
Mhm.
already a lot of determination, and it probably just even enhanced that or gave me a better understanding of it. But what a lot of people, especially so going through like a special ops as a ranger, you have to go through a selection process, and most people think it's just like the jack dude who can run 5-minute miles and all that kind of stuff, and that is a part of it. But the physicality, you do need to meet that minimum requirement of physicality, intelligence, all this other kind of stuff. But the biggest variable, in my opinion, is the determination, just the will to keep going and not quit. Because I saw guys day one, day two who were way more physically fit than I was, and just like studs. But when it hit that mental threshold where this was finally challenging for them, they're the ones that flustered because they're so easy physically for things to go their way. And so determination is beyond all that. With any sort of stressor, no matter what you're great at, there's always a way for you to meet that limit, right? You even if you're the strongest person, there's either always somebody stronger, or you can still exhaust somebody like that. If you're the smartest person, you can still stump them. if you're the most put together, you can still stress them out. And that's what selection process is for, of like, let's throw all these variables at people and see who cracks. So I mean, through that whole process, and even going on into Ranger Bat, I think it just really solidified it and gave me confidence to where I knew how to use it as a tool or as a power. Whereas before, maybe I had it, but maybe I just took it for granted, or it wasn't as polished as it was. And so, and that probably led me some down astray, because also when I was going through my mental trauma, that determination probably limited my ability to try to take help, because I had this like, oh, I'm a ranger, I don't need this help, or I can be in this
Wow.
dangerous situation. But and that's all the process of life and knowing yourself. And psychedelics can help kind of show you where you're full of BS, and show you where is actually your inner strength. But by the time and now, I think it's because of what I've done, and even when it gets really hard, I can be like, "Hey, I can handle this." Like, at least I can take another step forward, and even if I don't know where it's going to go, and that's always sort of the mantra of like, when you're exhausted, when you are mentally, physically exhausted, when you want to cry, when you just don't think you can continue on, and everything's against you, it's always just like, can you take another step? Can you hold on for 10 more seconds? And then you get to that 10 seconds. Can you hold on for another 10 seconds? And then eventually it passes. Like, even I feel like in some of the when you're in sort of the ayahuasca journey, because it obviously it can go through waves, right? There's some intensity sides of it, and it can be very intense. And so, if you just like breathe and be like, okay, it's gonna be okay, and like this is gonna pass, and if you just like go with that flow instead of holding on to like, no, 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 I don't want to go there. So and I think just allowing it and then going with that sort of rhythm of it is a lesson for life.
Absolutely. I think it's valuable for anything in life, right? Whether you're in the gym, or whether you're, in a relationship, or whether you're doing an exam, or whether you're going through a difficult psychedelic experience. It's basically one foot after the other, just one foot after the other, and just keep stepping and keep stepping and keep stepping and keep stepping. And then eventually, every time, there'll be one time where it doesn't get better, and then that's the last time you do anything. But other than that, it's like, it always gets better. It always gets better.
I wonder if the reason why ayahuasca can be so helpful and healing for veterans, or part of the reason. I just thought it was interesting, this contrast that you were describing of the mindset of the Army Ranger military person just pushing themselves to the limit, not accepting help because they are very like self-contained in their role, and kind of having that be their framework for how they live life. And then afterwards, when they are suffering from trauma and PTSD, and that, like, how difficult it can be to accept that help. And the way that a lot of plant medicine and ayahuasca works is that you have to surrender, and you have to be receptive and open. And maybe that's such a contrast to that mindset, but maybe that mindset was pushing them too far in one direction. And so, this can kind of help them walk the middle path. I don't know if that's something that resonates, but
Yeah, it
I'm
definitely
just
does, and I
curious.
do think that is a major factor. Ayahuasca and other psychedelics can humble any single person. And that, I think, being humbled and being in that vulnerable spot is absolutely necessary for any healing. And that's one of the hardest parts for any therapist to reach, because it's very hard for certain people that are shelled to get to that vulnerable spot, but you need that to get
Mhm.
out. And everybody has their shields, everybody has their protection, and veterans particularly, I think they grow very strong shields for certain reasons, because they're in these very extreme environments, and it helps them survive and be good at their jobs. But then
Mhm.
that shield often calcifies when they get out, because then they're struggling with these other sort of stuff, and they don't want to let the world in, because before, the world was a dangerous place. And so they have to do that. And then you also have the ego interplay with it. And so then you bring in ayahuasca, and it makes anybody feel like a little child. And I think it kind of gets them out of that delusion of like, okay, you might have been the most badass person, but you've met your match. And then it also puts your own brain against itself. And so even if you're in this contention thing, it's really your brain that's causing you this. And that's what people have to realize, when it's, again, with a therapist, it can be hard to accept that help from somebody else, because then you're just like, oh, what do they know? They don't know me. They didn't go to war. But when it's your own
Right.
brain saying this, then you're just like, oh, well, I guess I have no choice but to listen.
Speaking of war, wanted to kind of get kind of a double-sided question here of like, what is the kind of feeling and experience that veterans generally undergo? Like, what is it like when you're in an environment surrounded by violence? And like in some cases, you work with a lot of veterans, you're in an environment surrounded by violence, perhaps participating in violence, perhaps, in a situation where you're taking lives, or where people have had their lives taken, or you're seeing lives being taken. What is that like? How does that strike the person in their, in their heart, in their inside? And how does that transmute into life when they get home, when they get out? And then what are people feeling? What are these guys feeling when they come home? And then they struggle with getting into a peaceful life where that violence doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, those are all good issues, and I think there's a few different issues within that, which is what makes the trauma so hard. And also, each person's very unique, and so some people, just even being on a base where they don't go out, but having the existential sort of threat or the mortar rounds dropping by on bases, like that's enough to get them into, severe PTSD or sort of survival's guilt and stuff like that. Other people on the other side, especially on like the special ops, tend to be able to have better rationalization sort of sides of things, in terms of like, they know their mission, they know their job, and they know what the situation is. And so even though their job might be putting themselves in violence and having people around them die, and potentially killing other people, they can put that in sort of a more understandable sort of package, I guess, for lack of a better term, which can be hard for other people to understand. But there is ways of people going into that, because in that mindset, you're there for a reason, and these people are trying to kill you. And in the spectrum of, like, let's say World War II, like those guys are bad, and so if I don't do that, then I can't protect these people, potentially my family. And so they can kind of rationalize it. There's probably still going to be some like residual trauma, but then just also the situation where your stress levels are constantly at a heightened level, you're constantly wired, you're constantly in the survival mode. And there's early evidence to indicate that when you have certain like cortisol and some certain hormone levels that are at this high level, then they kind of get stuck there after a certain time. And so that's why when veterans come home, they tend to get this sort of hypervigilance. And so that is a pretty common thing among veterans, of hypervigilance, where they kind of have to always like check doors, where in malls they get, freaked, not freaked out, but like worried or apprehensive when there's too many people. um there's just all sorts of different issues that like stem from that, and it can be very hard. And so it does seem like with a lot of veterans, and especially those that have been for a while, it is almost like they have one foot in the military, one foot out. They are never fully able to get, both feet into the civilian world. No matter what, you're always going to be changed, like any sort of trauma. But that's what we're trying to do, is complete that transition to where they can actually live healthy lives. They can actually be, their family. There's kind of a trope where, military guys almost treat their family like soldiers. And that's pretty common and pretty accurate, where, they come home and they expect this to be done by their wife and kids. And it just doesn't work that way, right? I mean, for some families, but I don't necessarily think it's healthy. But so one of the things I kind of believe, especially military wise, is there's so much ceremony, there's so much indoctrination of like, this is how you become an individual, to working as a military group, because the only way militaries function is as a cohesive unit, where many people can respond to something as almost one, and they know where the other people are, they can move together. And that's how you have an effective military unit. But that takes training, that takes over and over again of indoctrination, getting you to think that way, getting you to be conscientious of where other people are and all this other kind of stuff. But there's no ceremony and there's no procedure for returning somebody back to the individual or the civilian, to bring down that hypervigilance, to bring down some of these things that might be absolutely necessary in war, but are not necessary on the streets of Burbank or what have you. And like I said, there's limitations of just talk therapy because it requires vulnerability, and you often hit this wall of you trying to rationalize it to yourself. And I think that's where psychedelics can really play a part way more than anything else. Because not only do you get the potential sort of psychotherapy side of it, but it does seem to reset, certain hormone levels. A lot of people I see on a pretty consistent basis that had hypervigilism, that goes down drastically. And Rudy, he was one of the ones that was at that retreat, and he had this complete transformation to where he was almost like hippie Rudy afterwards, and it was just sort of this real de-escalation. And he's now still even learning of like, okay, this is my new life. There's a before and after ayahuasca, Rudy, and so it is pretty fascinating. And I think I don't know, it does really seem to interplay with sort of the military culture in that way, because it is this sort of hard thing, but it does represent this sort of ceremonial transition, from being a boy to a man, to being a man to soldier, and then soldier back to being a man, kind of a complete transformation.
It's almost like returning home to yourself again, because you may return home physically, but perhaps mentally, energetically, emotionally, you're still in that battlefield. Your system is regulated to be in this, hypertensive battlefield situation. And, I feel like psychedelics have a way of re-regulating that system and helping people come back home to themselves internally too, and energetically. And emotionally. And so I really like the way that you're framing that. That there is a ceremony to go in, and we now need a type of ceremony or rite of passage to come back home to yourself afterwards.
Yeah.
What function did the actual group setting have when you guys came down with the New York Times to Soltara? Because you came down with a group of all military vets, right? Was it a private?
It was a partial group.
It was a
so
partial.
in the context of a larger retreat.
Okay. But your mention of like kind of when guys are indoctrinated into the army, it's like this big kind of ceremonial indoctrination, the setting where there's this bonding and there's this kind of exercise that people go through to get sorted out for action in the military, but there's no ceremony on coming home. Is there a difference between just an individual veteran going to do an ayahuasca ceremony versus a group of veterans coming in kind of as a band of brothers to go into that emotional battle together?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And even at the start of Heroic Hearts, we always at least try to do sort of a battle buddy system, because that's ingrained in you in the military. You have to pick your battle buddy or ranger buddy, and when you're training, especially, you never leave their side. You always know, and privates would get messed up because they would like wander off, and somebody would ask them where their buddy is, and they didn't know. But it is that because it's sort of like a safety thing. You always need to have somebody in your back. If you are even in like a combat situation, if you are by yourself, absolutely, and you have no idea where anybody else is, so many things have gone wrong, and that's the most dangerous, vulnerable spot you're in. So even if you have somebody else, then that's at least some sort of protection. That's at least something that you can work with. And so at the very beginning, we always at least try to incorporate that system to where they had somebody to talk to. Especially, it's almost like any other profession where you get this like a very specific speak. Even the ayahuasca profession, or like working with ayahuasca, you're going to say things in terms that if you just talk to somebody that didn't have any idea, you're gonna be like, I don't know what that is. And so, especially military culture and just ways of viewing things, pointing things out, it can be hard for them to relate that and to talk to other people. And so, having that buddy system, that had a really hard experience, to have somebody to talk to that they can actually, bond with. But yeah, I mean, since then, when we were able to having these even if it's among other civilians, having these groups, I think, really adds to the dynamic because it takes them back to that sort of brotherhood, sisterhood of the military. And again, from what we were talking about before, that is the complexity of what we're dealing with. Is that that's another issue? Is that isolation when veterans leave the military service? Oftentimes they're separated from this cohesive unit, this brotherhood, and they tend to be isolated. They tend to not be able to relate to society or the university that they're going to, and that's a big struggle as well. And so, kind of bringing them back and forging them back under this ayahuasca fire, we've seen some pretty powerful relationships that continue on. And so, with that as well, that is the power of it, of rebuilding these communities, rebuilding under with the help of psychedelics, of having these veteran communities around the US and the world that already had that connection via being veterans, but now have that connection being having gone through psychedelics and healing through that.
I can see how it would be of value for the veterans even to do ceremony with all civilians, still kind of having that approach of like you're a team unit, you're going into I mean, you're not going into battle when you go into a ceremony, but in a sense you are. You're going
Yeah.
in to confront your fears, you're going in to confront your emotions, you're going in to confront your traumas, and you don't know how that's going to play out, and it's going to be a little bit challenging for the mind, right? You're going to have to kind of, have courage through that ceremony and possibly endure a challenging experience. So I wonder if what we see every week is that regardless of who's in the group, you generally come away with a group of battle buddies. You come away with a team unit where it's like, and a lot of times they keep in touch over the years. We've had people come to Soltara who did their first ceremony together, like at Pulse 5 years ago, and have just like kept in touch over the years, possibly, linked up for a couple of ceremonies over the years. And now they're at Soltara. They're like ceremony buddies, they're like battle buddies that come to ceremony together. So you can still kind of build that community, I guess, regardless of whether, it's all vets in the community, it's all vets in the group, or whether there's vets plus civilians, or,
Yeah.
It really speaks to the power of community as part of the healing too. I think that's something that, we've really taken to heart at Soltara, at Pulse, where it's, group sizes that foster community, that are really able to connect individually with each person, and enough people that there's diversity, and also small enough that there's that sense of, okay, this is an intimate experience, and going through that together as a family. They come in at the same time and they leave at the same time. I think there's something really powerful about that, and then being able to take that back into the world. And I know Heroic Hearts has a large network that, you really try and link people up within local communities too, right? Like if
Yeah.
they're kind of in the same vicinity, just how important that can be, and just knowing you're not alone in the struggle.
Yeah, I think again that's another thing that Western society can learn from other cultures, is that you have these small, tight knit tribes, and the community supports everybody there. And there's no feeling of isolation, and you're seeing that
Exactly.
especially now with social media probably making it even worse. Is that even though we're connected, we're not connected, and so there's massive rates of depression and anxiety because we need those tribes. We need like a community to support us. We can't just some of the that's kind of the interesting thing living in New York, and they always do studies of this. Like the more densely packed an area is, the less connection there is, and it's
Wow.
like living in this apartment. If I lived in a small town or small neighborhood, I'd know practically everybody in that town, right? But I don't know anybody in my apartment building. I might see a few people like over and over again, but I have no real connection, and so it's just a wild sort
maybe
of
you
thing
should
of
try living in a smaller library, man.
That is really this big irony. It's like such a cognitive dissonance where through the internet we're more connected than ever. However, actually, it's not only is it creating this extra mask or layer of separation, between people over, the profiles and the way that they put themselves out there, which is something of an extra mask. But it's also making it so that we're not really connecting very much with the people that are right in front of us or right immediately around us. And yeah, I agree. I think that's definitely something we can learn from indigenous communities and just the way that they just stick together and live in such a way that they are the collective is kept in mind, when in the way that they go about living life.
Well, it's like the old, that's what they say with the old ways of doing a lot of this plant work. What they often say is that it's generally only the curandero that actually partook, and but they'd sing the Acaros to the tribe, and maybe some would partake, but it wasn't the same sort of thing. But their whole job was to protect the mental health of the tribe as well as the physical health. And so there's always this sort of group dynamic. And if somebody had some sort of mental trauma, I know in some cultures, even if it's some mental illness or what have you, it's the whole tribe's job to protect that and get out, the evil spirits or whatever the belief system is of that tribe. It's not just like, oh, that person's crazy, go someplace else.
Mm. Hmm.
So yeah, so let's wrap up. Let's hear what's up in the future here for Jesus. Heroic Hearts Project. I've got HHP
For
here.
humans.
And I was like, yeah, well, for humans, but humans in your orbit. What do you got kind of on the platter for the next 6 to 12 months? And how can listeners get in touch with you? How can they help out? How can people donate if they're interested in donating?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, we are a nonprofit in the US, and we're working to be one in the UK and Canada as well. And so, like I said, everything is volunteer. So, we try to keep as much as possible where all the donations go directly towards helping veterans to send them to places like Soltara to get ayahuasca, other psychedelic based treatment. So, if anybody can, donate even a small amount, it's very impactful. It helps us continue our mission. And unfortunately, with COVID, we've all been slowed down. We haven't been able to do as many retreats. And so, because of that, not only has mental health gotten worse across the world, around the world, but also our wait list has really exploded. So, any help that people can do, heroicheartsproject.org is our website. There's a donate button for veterans. They can go on that website and volunteer. There's an application. We also have an ambassador program. So civilians, veterans, professionals that want to help out and they just don't have the financial means or they just have time that they want to help, they can sign up there. In terms of us, we're all kind of hope, fingers crossed. We're going to try to plan as many. We have one tentatively planned with you where we're going to bring some veterans and hopefully do some interesting research. We've Fortunately, in this year, we've been able to expand. We have a branch in the UK, so we have veterans over there. We're building a branch in Canada, so we're trying to expand there. We have a few studies going on with ayahuasca and possibly psilocybin next year. And just sort of in the meantime, we're really just trying to continue to get the name out there and help as many veterans as possible. And as you said, a responsible, respectful way of working with places like Soltara and continuing this mission, continuing spreading the word and helping those that potentially want to pursue these modalities of therapy.
Right on, brother. Well, I really respect you. I really respect what you're doing. I love to see people doing what you're doing and chasing your dream, putting in the effort, putting in the work, the blood, sweat, and the tears to do something that has impact on the world and changes people's lives and sets an example for other people. So all the power to you, man. All the props to you. Thanks for making the time today, Melissa.
Much love for you, Jesse. Always an honor to work with you, speak with you. Looking forward to getting some awesome research done and more healing work done as well, hopefully in the spring or summer. So I'm sure I'll be seeing you soon.
Thank you guys. Good to talk to you. I hope to see you soon. Always a pleasure working with you. And yeah, I hope with all this, I hope we all continue to do great things and advance forward in this joint cause.
Peace out, man. Have a great weekend.
Yeah. Appreciate it, guys. Take care.
Bye,
Cheers.
Jesse. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
The Daniel Cleland Podcast.
Thank you so much, my friends, for checking out the Daniel Cleland Podcast. We love you and appreciate you. If you liked what you saw, please like, subscribe, share it up with your friends and loved ones who might benefit from these episodes. And if you'd like to check out more episodes, we've got some links conveniently placed over there. So check it out, share it up. And until next time, be well. Much love to you. Thank you so much.